Yeah.
Just to introduce myself, I'm Chad Hewson from Teck Resources. And I actually spent the entire week in a meeting with, we do have a kind of a geoscience leadership team for exploration. And I'm part of that. And part of the reason I didn't make any slides is because I was making slides for that week, whole week. So, I actually spent some time with each one of our senior technical people. The way we structure ourselves is we have people that look at our commodity portfolio across our business, and then we have technical leaders within each jurisdiction that actually ensure sort of best practice and execution. And then we'll have a couple leaders, in particular disciplines like geophysics and geochemistry, and it's all headed up by a chief geoscientist, who some of you might know, Andrew Davies. So, in general, I think we've heard a lot of really good discussion and a lot of the things I'm going to touch on have been mentioned. But I think we would challenge the assumption that they're about the sort of investment versus discovery rates. I think it has a lot to do with some of the things that people have touched on today in terms of a lot of the exploration happening in mature jurisdictions, adding sort of incremental resources, but also from our perspective, we'll have sort of core operations that have potential to deliver a huge amount of discoveries going forward, and that may be something that we choose to pursue or not pursue just based on the capacity of our infrastructure to actually process, like a resource development plan. So, I actually think there's probably a lot of big discoveries waiting in brownfield environments, but it has to be planned out, by the particular owners of that operation. I think if you look at the expenditure, I would challenge how much has there really been an increased expenditure at true greenfields environments, and who's doing true greenfields exploration nowadays. So that's whether or not it's in someone's brownfields, like along trend or something like that. I think you have to separate that, or you're starting to look undercover, or you're looking in new districts. And for us, I think the change in greenfields has definitely moved to covered targets and covered districts, and all the technology that's been developed in the last 20, 30 years, 40 years in the business has delivered discoveries in certain cases. I mean, you can argue whether or not one is more effective than another, but in general, if we move to covered targets, it does change the game. And the discussion earlier about drilling is specifically one that the industry needs to address. I mean, we have not innovated drilling technology very far in this industry at all, and we continue to not acquire the maximum amount of information from the drilling activity, and sort of choose not to do that because of operational inefficiencies. So I think that's a huge area to improve, and obviously the DRT CRC has been looking at that. A common theme from our commodity specialists is that too much focus on sort of the genesis and characterization of deposits. Not that it's not useful, but it's sort of short-term focused, and it may help a specific a participant or sponsor, but it doesn't actually change the way we look at exploring for districts, or new districts that we're not aware of in an area selection piece. In general, like outside of some really well developed exploration jurisdictions, we probably lack key foundational data sets to sort of set the scale for metallurgic province frameworks. And I think the Tathian example is a really good example. That Teck has been exploring in Turkey for 25 years, and really took some significant learnings out of the data sets that was delivered by the NDRU. And I think that was internally we had to have a real sort of gut check there. In addition, I think then how do you translate that? The research of translating those data sets into sort of fertility and basically sort of narrowing down the opportunities into some key districts that you might want to focus on is huge. And whether or not we even have the ability to discover new covered districts, we're not even aware of. In addition to that, I think it was mentioned that the capacity for target prediction is quite poor. You know, so to get a sense of, you know, where then within all those districts you actually want to focus, and then, you know, what does the signature of our targets look like with changing depth? So do we actually understand that? Has that been studied, you know, in detail? I think that's one that the industry will have to address as we explore it deeper. And I think we probably apply our shallow understanding, our shallow signature understanding to our deep target generation. You know, this is one that's big in our company. So, you know, the translation of geoscience data to an economic mineral deposit. So, you know, we talked about having metallurgists within Teck, but where's the geoscience and the metallurgy? And I think that's something from us that we don't address it at an early enough stage. So, you know, being able to sort of move, you know, have even from a case history point of view, you know, look at how, you know, acquiring the right data earlier actually helps you make better decisions about a project, from recovery of you know, your commodity of interest, you know, also making sure that you understand what the deleterious elements could be, and how that might impact on the environmental situation downstream. You know, that sort of holistic look of early stage geoscience impact all the way through the value chain is big. You know, we talked a little bit as a group here about integration, and if I look at our team internally, we've got a real weakness in integrated interpretation. Like I think, you know, we've learned it through application. You know, as you've had the right experience, if you've been lucky enough to have the right experience. But I guess what that kind of brings me to is, you know, do we actually have in academics, you know, really integrated research teams? So, you know, there are researchers or research groups that have connections to other disciplines. But in terms of, like, I'm a geophysicist by education. I worked with Doug Oldenburg. I mean, that's not an integrated research team by any stretch of the imagination. You know, but do we have, you know, people with that knowledge kind of, you know, working in the same institution, you know, on the same project? You know, there may be examples of that where that's done well, but I think in general that's something we should look at in changing the model with which we build research teams, and I think that would build better talent, you know, high-performing people or high-quality people that we talk about, to be able to sort of go into industry. And obviously, this is a very industry-centric view. And in general, I mean, we need platforms to be able to communicate better. So, you know, there's some good examples of people looking at innovation in consumption of data for 3D views, so that, you know, you're working in GoCAD, you're working in Leapfrog, you're working in MindSight, nobody can talk to each other. You know, we're actually, you know, working on a kind of cloud-hosted viewer where we can all look at our data without having to deal with that software expertise, which is a huge limitation nowadays in skill sets, and it's a barrier to communication. Challenging the status quo, like, you know, I don't want to offend any academics, but academics are really territorial, right? I mean, if they've developed an idea and they've published on that idea, it's their reputation. And, you know, I think, you know, the discussion about getting new insights into particular types of models, like somebody was telling me that, you know, a big exploration company or a big mining company is engaging, you know, a whole new group, like a volcanologist group, to look at porphyries. You know, which is traditionally not the way we've done it. I know myself from years of experience in Ireland that there's a lot of inaccuracies or you know, maybe just don't know what you don't know in Irish lead zinc deposit research. So I think that's something that as a group we need to continue to sort of engage new people. A couple last points. So we talked a lot about big data here, and you know, it's a question of quality. You know, crap in, kind of crap out thing is true. You know, and I think we spend a lot of time, you know, having people go and log core. You know, it's always our most junior people that log core with the least experience, and that ultimately forms a huge amount of the data set that we base our decisions on. But you know, we need to, you know, embrace technologies that can make that process more objective and get the geologists working on things that are, you know, more important. So like relational data with respect to the cross-cutting veins and that type of overprinting alteration observations. I think that work doesn't get done, and in general, if we move to the big data, we're going to have that problem. Just geologist A and geologist B totally see it differently. I do think that it is the future though, because if the drilling innovates the way it's going to, we're going to get a lot of objective characterization of our rocks as we drill. That's going to create a huge terabytes of data that we're going to have to deal with somehow. And I think other industries are showing that there's some pretty smart machine learning algorithms that we realize we need people, obviously, to deal with that. And I think the last point I would make is the models for research consortiums. I like this idea of getting service providers in on that and collaborating, because they're doing a lot of the innovation now. I mean, big mining companies are doing less and less internal R&D, and we have to think about that shared vision of what we want to achieve. So from a big mining company perspective, we need to get together and we need to put the dollars towards funding something that is commercial and available, and not internal and subject to all these strings attached. Like, I think getting service providers involved early in the game and having them along for the ride is a model we should really embrace, because in general, research isn't getting adopted, right? As an internal company, or from my internal view, we're sponsoring it, it goes on a server, and then nothing happens after that. So, we've got to get better at thinking about what the outcome and the product is going to be of the research, how that's going to be delivered. You mentioned the UBC JIT stuff that I was involved with. That worked because it delivered a code that geophysicists used within the company. But how do you also do that for the ideas and concepts? And I also think that the technology side of things for the service providers is a big deal. They'll have something to gain from it, so they should probably share some of the risk. And I think that's it. The rest of the points were kind of made.
Nice job.